Cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome to... I actually don't know what episode this would be, which is, I guess, a good sign. We've kind of reached the point where, there's enough episodes to not have it be very prominent in terms of, oh, this is episode X. So welcome to episode whatever. So I am back after getting a newborn. So very tired and very sleep deprived, but super keen to chat about JavaScript as always. So I am joined by Mike and Ben and Xandor from Operativa, and we're just going to catch up super quickly in terms of what happened this month in terms of JavaScript. I think before we dive into that, Ben, do you just want to give a bit of a quick overview of what Operativa is and what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So Raid Shadow Legends is a mobile. Wrong
sponsor.
Wrong sponsor.
Wrong podcast.
So Operativa builds developer tooling for the TypeScript and React ecosystems. You should be seeing some things from us quite soon. In the databasey space and in the inter-service communication space. We also provide a consulting service and a supplementary capacity service for teams that want to take their TypeScript and React to the next level. We're also hiring, always hiring for people who want to work with really, really crazy TypeScript, really, really crazy React. I want to build cool stuff and give back to the community. Everything we build is MIT licensed. That's Raid Shadow Legends.
And Blue Apron. Yeah, cool. All right, so let's dive into it. So we got a couple of big things. I just whipped up some super quick slides in terms of some big things that are worth unpacking, and then if there's time afterwards we can get into smaller things. It's kind of like the thing of that analogy of the big rocks and whatever. If you put the big rocks in first, yeah, there you go. So Mike has some interesting ideas around React and TypeScript and recent developments around that. So Mike, I'm happy for you to kind of just introduce the topic and then we can unpack it a bit.
Yeah, I'm super excited. There's some news on the front of TypeScript and React and TypeScript as well. I think the TypeScript React stuff is going to be fairly quick. This episode, we're going to be largely fanboying over Mark Erickson, who is the core maintainer for Redux and Redux Toolkit. And he just does a bunch of other really incredible stuff. He had an MR into the React docs for TypeScript use, and that's finally gone live. So now we have a source of truth, or from the horse's mouth, of using TypeScript with React, which is quite nice. The docs are fairly extensive, and yeah, I think it's a great addition to them. And in the same vein, TypeScript 5.2 has gone live, which is really exciting. There are a couple of new additions. Some are for big brains. Some are for the rest of us. The one that I'm most excited about is the copy array methods. So I remember the first time I got bitten by the sort method, mutating my existing array of things. I remember it vividly because I spent a solid hour trying to figure out what was going on and how it was biting me. But essentially, we have some exciting copy array methods, which include to sorted, to spliced, with, and to reversed. So those are really, really cool. I'm a big fan of. I mean, they're small niceties, but it's that little bit of syntactic sugar that makes our lives a bit easier. There's something else that's really interesting that...
I just want to quickly jump in on that. So if I understand correctly, those are also in the JavaScript specification already as well. I think they're supported in some of the Neo browsers like Chrome and so forth.
I think they're final stage now.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, these things generally arrive in TypeScript just as they're imminent in JS.
Okay.
But either way, it's super exciting, and they're useful methods to have. What I was going to segue into is using. This is something that I have chatted briefly. Actually, there are so many.
Mm.
There's another one to chat about as well, but I think using is a quick one, or something that is fairly complicated, but nice. Maybe someone could run us through that. I know Ben has been very excited about it.
Yeah, so using specifically for something we're busy working with at Operativa is very, very cool. The long and short of it is, if you put, like you can see on screen there, a symbol.dispose on an object, and then instead of const let var or whatever, you say using thing with symbol.dispose, the moment that variable goes out of reference, the symbol.dispose method gets called. So if you're doing things like databases where you have to close a connection after you're done, instead of having to try catch finally or whatever, you can literally just put a symbol.dispose on your connection or connection pool, and the moment it goes out of reference, it gets disposed automatically. And that makes things so clean, and also avoids some serious footguns with things that expose functionality that needs to be cleaned up, which the caller might not be aware of or might forget about. So it doesn't really change much. Like, it doesn't enable anything new. It just takes away a lot of code, and also gives consumers of libraries that have usually IO concerns a lot less to have to think about, which I think is really great. The TypeScript team was very quick to add it in their release once it reached the appropriate stage with ECMA, which I'm very, very appreciative of. Yeah, see, so there's an IO example. You've got a file handle. You release the lock automatically with symbol.dispose.
Okay.
It's just great.
Yeah. Would you say this is primarily concerned with like garbage collection?
Well,
it's more about
cleaning up, right? So in this example, what we're doing is we're opening a file, and that file, depending on how you open the file, has side effects outside of your process, right? So that file, you might be locking an inode.
Oh, I see. Okay,
right?
I see. Okay.
When you're done with the file, you need to release the lock.
Yes.
Now, traditionally, I think if you probably scroll down, you'll see what the original code was. Or scroll up, you'll see what the original code was. Yeah, you'll always do like a try, catch, finally. And your finally is almost always connection.close. But the interesting thing about this is the useful thing to return from a method and the thing that cleans it up isn't also always like they're orthogonal things. So the interfaces of the libraries we use end up returning these like Frankenstein objects that have like dispose methods or clean me up or whatever on them, and they might not even be in the right place for the finally block to reach them. Using's great.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I assume this would be something that would be really helpful to if you're maintaining, for example, the MongoDB driver for JavaScript or stuff like that, I assume.
Well, if you're just interacting with the driver, with the driver, or let's put it in web dev terms, you have a method you call that like binds an event, or let's say we have a method get size of div. And that has to like attach an event to something and listen for a scroll or a resize event and get the thing. But all you cared about is the width to come back. With this, you can get that width back, and then instead of going like const add listener width equals this thing, and then remove listener get with back. You just go using value get with, and as long as there's a symbol.dispose. Okay, this is a terrible example because you can't add a symbol.dispose to a number, but
yeah. For composite types,
yeah. Like if there's things
Yeah.
that need to be cleaned up, it's one word instead of 20 lines of code.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah. Also, I have some cool news. Check this out. To reversed works in my browser.
Interviews
That's
is easier now.
sweet.
When they say reverse an
Yeah.
array, you use this one. When they ask you to reverse
And what kind of time?
Oh.
Like in what kind of time and with what kind of space?
Yeah.
But
at the very least,
this
it
is
seems like that
optimized
method
below the
actually
sea
works.
level, which is cool. The cool thing about things being in the standard library is they're optimized below the sea level. So you know that all the copy semantics that come into place are being used right.
So to be fair, that's not always the case right as it lands, that it's so well optimized, but that will improve over time.
Xander, you are a bit soft, FYI.
Okay, let me up this.
Cool.
Better?
But Mike, yes. Mike, what else do you have for us?
I totally got confused. There has been some work on WeakSet, and the optimist in me was hoping that we got the new set methods, but that's not the case. So I think those are the juicy bits from, like, there are some improvements in tooling, but nothing that is groundbreaking. I think there's some more juicy stuff coming for 5.3, but like those are, I think, are the two big highlights.
I think WeakSet is also a really interesting introduction for like incredibly memory intensive applications, because you can now do like bona fide object pools in JavaScript. Now that we have
been around for a long
WeakSet.
while.
So I've looked into that, and I'm not 100% sure how you would actually do object pools that way, because nothing in a WeakSet is guaranteed to actually be freed. And I looked into it, and you can't just do like automatic object pools with WeakSets. You'd still have to manually call like whatever your version of free is. Dispose could make that a little bit easier, maybe in certain cases. But
We lost scope.
But the thing with WeakSets is that all it can tell you is like, oh, this thing is still live, yes or no, kind of thing.
But like when you're doing a object pool, like you want to have your own essentially mark and sweep operations, right? And that's what it enables for you.
Well, no, not really, because if you in the object pool are still holding a reference to the thing, then it's obviously still going to be in your WeakSet. And you can't get a reference to it from the WeakSet.
All right.
Only if you have reference to it can you get the thing. It'll tell you whether it's in the set, yes or no. And with weak maps, you might have associated some data with something, but it can't really be used for object pools as such. I wish, but it's really not the case. Unfortunately, the dispose symbol.dispose might make freeing a little bit easier, like a little bit less boilerplatey and cumbersome. That's about it.
That's sad.
Shall we talk about source maps?
Out of interest, sorry, just to
Skull will be
close,
right back. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
to close that one off nicely. To reversed got added to JS, I believe, the beginning of this month. So about 4 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago. So very cool that it's not just for STS folks.
But is it a Netscape Navigator 4.8?
You'll have to test for us and let us know.
Okay. Xandor, source maps, React, production.
Yeah. So in the
2 months too late for your
Skull,
last visit to React source.
So React, not really React, but Mark Erickson, the maintainer of Redux Toolkit, has come up with source maps for the production builds of React. React themselves don't ship source maps, which is really, really annoying when you're trying to figure out what might be happening in React itself. Like I've had situations where I've needed to dive into React source code. Very specifically, React has an interesting behavior. In development mode, when React calls any callbacks or event handlers or anything that it really manages for you, the way it does that is it tries to make sure that you can still kind of like see any errors in case your thing throws. And the way it does that is it creates a random DOM element. They actually call it a React element, but the browser doesn't understand what it is, so it falls back to a span that's kind of just in the global kind of scope. And then they add an event handler to that, which runs your function. And then they trigger an event on this thing so that, in other words, what happens is even if there's something in the React render stack that would otherwise have caught your exception, it'll now still bubble to the top. But it doesn't do that in production. And there are other differences in the production build versus the other build. But stepping through production is terrible because it's minimized and the names of everything are minimized, and you have so little idea of what's really, really going on.
Single character things.
Yeah, sometimes
very
you get two
aggressively.
characters. Yeah, very aggressive. and this makes sense, right? But you kind of can't do it yourself. And it's super annoying to try and debug that. You basically just end up getting lost. You end up reading the source code, and they have this global constant that they defined as part of their build process, which is __ capital DEV dev __. And they basically go if dev do some stuff else, whatever, and then their build process does dead code elimination. And that's why it's extra confusing because the code is literally sometimes different. So if you're looking at the dev build versus the production build, the initial logic between what to do when is gone. It's stripped from both the builds. You only see that when you actually go to their repo and read the source code. So yeah, this should make life a lot easier, and I'm very happy that it's finally around. Also, when Mike mentioned this in our pre-session, I was already familiar with this effort. Wonder why. In any case, this literally you can see a day ago. But you can now get source maps in production. I'm sure this has implications for telemetry and error monitoring and all sorts of other things as well, but certainly for debugging. And of course, there's a PR out to upstream this. It's actually been going for a while, and it's been a bit slow because Dan is on holiday. So
Isn't he at Blue Sky?
Isn't he? At Blue Sky?
Blue Sky? Yeah.
I don't know. The Mark said he was on holiday, so that's all I know.
Ah, right.
Oh, hey, look at that.
Hello.
Even GitHub really struggles to do arrows correctly. All right.
Sorry about that,
So
guys.
that's that. No problem.
Welcome back, Scott.
I got the load shedding special.
For international viewers in South Africa, every few hours, regions of the country just lose power for a little while, so everyone else can have some for a bit.
Yeah,
It's a prank.
luckily
We have to share.
I'm a JavaScript developer, so I'm used to things just exploding or not working for no reason at all. So
Unpredictability is part of our lives.
Exactly. Yeah, I live for this. All right. So what I want to chat about is Jamstack. So I think specifically, so this isn't. I don't necessarily want to point to a specific article or anything. But this is something that has been discussed quite a bit. Let me just Google Jamstack is dead. And cool. There's a couple, is Jamstack dead? So forth. Jamstack is dead. I think. So most of this I've been consuming via secondary sources. I have some opinions on this, but okay. It seems like Netlify has officially abandoned the term Jamstack. So they're not actively pushing it anymore. Composable web. Okay. So yeah, I'm curious what everyone's thoughts on this is. And in the meantime, I'll see if I can find a more primary source on this.
How inflammatory am I allowed to be?
Sure. Like like we're talking about JavaScript here, so like
I don't
inflammatory
know.
is the default mode.
Like my most inflammatory opinion on the Jamstack is that it's like memcached in front of a Rails server, but worse.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
That's just me teasing. I still see I see Jamstack as an evolution of static site generators for a different, a larger scale market. Like you can't for an e-commerce website pre-compile and build like your entire catalog. Like bringing that the laziness into it is what I think was novel about the Jamstack. The other novel components of the Jamstack were like the intentional architecture decisions you made and the idea of headless CMSs and all of that. And I think all of that was valuable and great and cool. I just think like practically it didn't. We're moving past it. Headless CMSs are now a thing, and there are very many very good headless CMSs available that allow us to do some very interesting things. But Jamstack itself, the parts were greater than the whole in this case.
No, sure. And like that's why I wanted to ask you guys first, because like that would be my take. And obviously I just wanted to sanity check that first, whether I'm just way out or. But yeah, effectively, I think that's my take as well, is that in the same way that people, like we don't necessarily talk about like cell phones that much anymore. We just talk about phones, and the implication being that a cell phone is just a regular phone. And I think like when Jamstack was coined, it was kind of very in opposition to this. Everything is a monolith. There's no decoupling. You literally just set up a WordPress instance with everything. And so I think to a large degree, it kind of like, what word? It kind of like it was a way to articulate a different way of thinking about things, and I think that has caught on sufficiently enough where first and foremost, like it starts becoming meaningless using something like Jamstack as a way to distinguish it from something else, because to a large degree that is such an accepted way of doing things nowadays. And also, like, I think it's also been to a large degree a victim of its own success, where it started encapsulating so many different things where the term itself became meaningless. So we had that big thing where it went from Jamstack with the capitalized J, A, and M to Jamstack the word, to kind of break away from this JavaScript API markdown like implications in terms of the acronym. So I think to a large degree, it's basically that the world where Jamstack was created effectively, I think, doesn't exist anymore. And this term Jamstack has kind of lost a bit of its meaning, because we're no longer in that world where like decoupling your and static site. I think like to a large degree, a lot of this was coined when mostly the only static site generator around was GitHub Pages and and Jekyll and Jekyll, so I think we've kind of moved so I think we've moved so far beyond that, where Jamstack as a term is actually meaningless now, you know. So I don't know. That's generally my take. It's become so pervasive and so accepted that having a flag around which to rally doesn't really have that much meaning anymore. I'm curious what you guys think.
So for me personally, I only touched the Jamstack ecosystem briefly, and it was via Gatsby, which I'm going to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan. I'm not the biggest fan of Gatsby in particular. I think everything is a GraphQL query is perhaps a little bit foolhardy, as well as I got to be honest, their docs left me wanting many times.
And you're not alone. You know, if you look at, you know, Next
I spent
versus
some time
Gatsby.
with Gatsby.
Yeah, I started out with Gatsby as well, and I think just Next, so like this idea of pre-generation, like just Next just ended up doing it better than Gatsby did, and also way faster. So I think that's why Gatsby has kind of been trailing off a bit. But yeah, and what again? You go ahead.
I think also where these things really mattered were, in my opinion, was like large scale static websites. So either like a really big e-commerce thing, or like think a newspaper or some kind of outlet like that, where the amount of customization per page, and I mean customization per viewer, right, is actually intended to be incredibly low, right? The kind of thing where there's not a lot of personalization, put it that way, for most of the pages. That's where I think. And the thing is, though, I don't know how many of those websites there really are relative to, for example, how much line of business application software gets written, which FYI estimates range to about 90% of all software is basically written behind closed doors and never released. So I think also it's, in some ways, it's actually kind of niche. The Jamstack approach in terms of where going full jam stack, the Raspberry, right? Like is really kind of a bit of a niche thing, and it does make sense. And I think one of the things that Netlify did made it a lot easier to use Markdown stuff as a source and use Git as source control, even when you had complete non-techies involved in the editorial process, right? Who needed to make edits and that kind of thing. I think they did a lot of work in the tooling there that was really cool.
Which is my headless CMS point, right?
Yeah. And I think to a large degree as well. Wait, why didn't it? I think to a large degree as well is, I think that has gotten so integrated into different approaches where talking about it as a stack like is maybe not useful. You know, so you probably have, you know, some type of your site, like even if you have a product that's documentation or whatever, or, you know, or there's like a landing page or whatever. And, you know, and you can like add a lot of that stuff with, once again, like Next or whatever. So I think like the stack implication is kind of where things get muddied and where the term itself is not that useful anymore, like where you're actually building your entire stack around it as opposed to where it's part of a stack. Like it's definitely something that's still being done very much. I think there's still a lot of space for quote unquote Jamstack to cannibalize a lot of stuff that's currently WordPress sites that literally are serving static content, and you're paying for an Apache server and it gets hacked every year and whatever. So I think there's a lot of inroads there still. But I think in terms of whatever that thing is, describing it with the term Jamstack is becoming less and less useful. I think even if you look at things like Astro and so forth, which would fit like this traditional conception of Jamstack, I think they also kind of they kind of shy away a bit from the Jamstack term as well, just because it comes with so much muddiness and baggage and whatever. Yeah.
It's actually going to be interesting
my
to see
general-
what happens
Yes.
when React server components are like super ready for prime time, right? Because one of the big problems with Jamstack, if you were using React, was yes, you get the SEO, but in many cases you're still have that like huge upfront hydration cost because it doesn't work in this kind of like islands way that Astro does, right? Like everything needs to hydrate. I mean, I once worked on a project where we had, using Next, a server-side, like pre-generated pages, e-commerce site, and the time to interactive on mobile, and this is not due to Next specifically, but it's just because it's easy to shoot yourself in the foot. The time to interactive on mobile when I joined the project was 14 seconds. 14 seconds, right? Hectic.
That's almost as enough time for me to form an opinion on a React article.
Wow.
It's actually 14 seconds to read the headline.
It says more about you than it says about the performance. Okay, cool. So, but it seems like most of this commentary is coming from the fact that Netlify is slowly moving away themselves from Jamstack, which is a term that they've been pushing very heavily. For example, if you Control F or Command F on their homepage, literally the only mentions of Jamstack is in the footer, is the Jamstack book and the Jamstack fund. So I think that's where a lot of this discussion is coming from, and not necessarily that anyone came out and said, okay, Jamstack's no longer a thing. It's just like a lot of companies. I think also Vercel adopted the term Jamstack at some point, and they've completely moved away from it. Cool. All right. So the term itself, I think, is becoming less useful. But I think in terms of that type of approach, I think there's still a lot of way to go in terms of things that are running on dynamic servers that have no business actually requiring a server that you need to pay for each month, with a database that gets queried every time you hit a page. But yeah. All right. This is Ben. Things you forgot or never knew because of React. Yes.
Let's do 14 seconds to form an opinion on that.
You have 14 seconds to form the opinion and then 4 hours to unpack it.
Okay, so I have opinions.
Same here.
Josh Collinsworth is a reasonably influential person. Has done a lot of cool work. Specifically, I think on web components. I might be misinformed, but has played a big part in web components, and has worked a lot with React. And he wrote this here article about basically what it has been like being in React for the decade it has been around, and what has come and what has gone, and some comparisons to other frameworks. And I mean, this is something I've been wanting to do myself. I've been wanting to write a article comparing the new kids on the block with React, and I haven't, because like it's really hard to do objectively.
Yes.
And like, so what is my main thing? My main thing is there are different people using React to build things for the web runtime. To Xandor's point earlier, something like 90% of software doesn't get a fancy, flashy domain that people naturally land on. It's probably projects potato.local /logmein that gets visited. And these things also get built with with various things, mostly SAP, but sometimes Spring, increasingly React. Now, it ties into the HTMX discussion that's been happening recently as well. I think there's a large part of the web that is predominantly content driven with sprinklings of interactivity. And a lot of devs work in that space, and I have a lot of respect for them because you are targeting very different problems than a lot of other devs are. Things like time to interactive and first contentful paint and like your bundle size are super important because that's what drives engagement with your platform, and that is important to your software. But like I've had conversations with devs. So for example, a project I've worked on has a production bundle that is about 12 megabytes large. That bundle only changes every quarter or so. Even though there are intermediate releases, there are change control processes that have to happen before it lands on the end user. So like we spend a lot of time figuring out how to make the interpreting side faster. And by a lot of time, I mean, if it gets slow, we look at it and then we fix it. But the app takes a while to boot up, but once it's booted up, that tab will stay open on the user's machine for months. Like they'll command click or middle mouse click and open new tabs and like wait the half a second it takes for the app to boot up. But this is also like a multiple hundreds of thousands of lines of code React application, and it has to be. Not necessarily has to be a React application. Ember would have been fine. Sencha would have been fine. Many other things would have been fine. But we choose React because data down, actions up, and it's easier to figure out what you're presenting to the user in complex UI state if you have your UI as a function of state. And these apps have different needs, is what I'm trying to get to. And I'm trying to be succinct, and I'm trying not to anger too many people. These apps have different needs. And if I look at Svelte, or I look at Solid, or Quick, or whatever, I see them solving problems for the former category. Like content-rich websites with interactivity, not necessarily full-on applications. And I mean, like there's other kinds of things like applications. So let's say you're building something that heavily leverages Canvas to do Canva. You're building Canva, or you're building like Monaco, a rich text editor, or whatever.
Yeah,
like React and Co lend themselves really well to that. But like the moment you get into that, you're more talking about the interactivity of the page than you are talking about the content of the page. And when we're talking about this interactivity, that is all client-side. So even React server components, when it comes out, isn't going to really affect a large swath of React's user base, because a lot of the complexity that we deal with is in the interactivity of the page. If you're doing something like a user's profile page, let's try and make it generic, it's a display, and if you click on any of the fields, they become editable fields. Once you click on that field, now its validations need to kick in. It might have dependent validations on other fields, and it might have server validations that are impossible to do on the client. Let's say I'm changing my username, and it has to be unique. That has to be checked by the server. We could do this old school with server postbacks, but we want rich experiences that don't take the user out of the place they're in, while also having lots of little dependent things. So let's say if your username includes the word shark, your application has a little baby shark floating on the top toolbar, right? I
have two
update
daughters,
my
that's very
username
topical.
to include shark.
Yeah.
How do like traditional server-based postback? Sure, everything's fine, but like now everything's interactive on the client side. Like getting all those things to happen, not great. So I've said a lot, and I don't think I've been very coherent. Svelte is
Yeah, no,
cool.
I got it. Yeah.
Svelte is cool. I think Svelte gets Svelte's reactivity is weird to me, and it hasn't clicked for me yet. And it's extensions. It's a language. It's not a framework. And I like its templating is clunky to me. I don't know why people don't like JSX. I don't know where there's this common argument of, oh, you have to map over a list of things to get it into. Like that was one of the greatest, freshest breaths of
you do that
air
with
I've
plain JavaScript
experienced.
as well.
Yeah, like
if
idea
if you're interfacing with DOM, you have to loop.
But like the idea that my DOM is a data structure in JSX.
Exactly.
Like the moment you move to templating, I'm not even going to talk about the static analysis losses you get with template languages. They're possible. Absolutely, it's possible to get static analysis into template languages, but you're not going to get a lot of people. There's going to be like 3 people in the world working on that template language, trying to get it a good language server. Whereas any advancements in the language server for TypeScript with JavaScript or the JavaScript language server extends itself into JSX just by default, because it's just a data structure with some syntactic sugar. That's point number 1. Point number 2, I think out of all the other frameworks, Solid is probably the only other option I would pick. But Solid is as great as it is, and its reactivity model is very interesting. And that's something that React's not going to adopt. But when React Forget becomes a thing, a lot of the ergonomic benefits that Solid gives you are not going to be missing in React or Preact. And if you like the reactivity model of Solid, you can use Preact with its signals. And that is actually mentioned in this article. I'll give it that. But this is like a really well-written article. But the point that angered me is like React still doesn't do web components. I think web components is the most overrated web standard in the last long while. Like it. I wrote Polymer apps.
Ben, you need to tell me. You need to tell me when I need to pull you back in, because you're. I don't know this man. I have no idea who this man is. Like I don't know.
I wrote
on the show.
I wrote Polymer apps. I wrote my own little framework on top of web components and the Shadow DOM and all of these things called Sushi and like. 2014, 15, like when web components came out, when Polymer came out, like I was super on this train. I thought the problems it solved were, I don't think the problems that web components solves are good. I don't think the implementation of web components is suited to most teams to use without a framework. And I think the frameworks that are built on top of web components don't use it to its best advantage. Even Svelte, right, which has web component support, is like, but what does it actually do that Svelte can't do without it?
I actually think they moved, if I'm not mistaken, like they might have come back again, but at some point they definitely moved away from web components. And I think one of the reasons being listed is because you can't do lazy evaluation with web components. But yeah, so maybe just to move on from there, because I also just want to touch on some ideas of Xander, and like also like to say save you from yourself, Ben. But
save me from myself.
But
save me from myself.
I 100%
to summarize.
Agree.
To summarize, like React has rough edges. Absolutely, React Forget is going to take the majority of the complaints that I see people like the having to remember to use memo or whatever goes away. JSX is fundamentally superior to templated languages.
Agreed.
Fight me.
Yeah.
I've very rarely seen a templated language that works as well. Anyway,
I have one
step back.
3 cents, let's say, because of inflation. The thing that hurts me most about this article is, out of all the options of alternatives that Josh lists, he says Vue is possibly the closest option to React. Although we have Solid and Preact a little bit further down the list.
Yeah. No, sure. I don't even want to go into my views on that. But like, I think for me, if I had to summarize this, like first and foremost, I think what I find frustrating about these type of things is, there are a lot of people that are really deep in the React world that has valid criticisms of React. I think the first person that would come to mind would be Dan Abramov. Like, ask him about React. Like, he is probably one of the biggest no, I forgot the word. Critics. Sorry, I haven't been sleeping much. Actually, so I listened to a recent episode where he was on JavaScript Jabber, and what they did, they actually spoke about this phenomenon where, React is so immensely popular, but yet at the same time, the retention of it is amazingly high for something that is this popular, because generally those two, you see retention kind of dwindling a bit once things reach a certain level of popularity. And he actually pushed back hard quite a bit against that, and saying that, there's he doesn't believe that there's that level of satisfaction of React. He actually thinks this is a misrepresentation. But yeah, he has some great, I think anyone who's in the React world knows that React hooks are outdated. And they come with pain points. But the thing is, you can't really compare, but there comes a price of maturity. React is really mature compared to Quick, compared to Astro, Fresh, all of these. And the price you pay for maturity is there's a lot of legacy stuff that just can't change overnight. So I don't know, I find it frustrating that people tend to latch onto a lot of these type of thoughts and a lot of these criticisms of React without actually just reading or listening to people in the world of React that have valid criticisms against things in React. But as you mentioned, Ben, React is changing so much right at this moment that who knows whether any of this is going to be relevant in 2 years.
So it seems we have a question from the audience that I'm going to answer quickly. I just want to 2 things before that. Number 1, most of the problems with React can be solved with the compiler. Fight me. It's on its way. Number 2, Josh Collinsworth, I do not mean to attack the article. I think you wrote very well. You made me feel some feelings, and I shared my feelings on what I felt. And the big feeling is that web components get way too much love, and effort could be spent in other places. Question from the audience from Kyle McLeod, I think. What is my view on the future of LitElement as a basis for web components? I have dabbled with LitElement, and it is not bad. There are some things about its ergonomics that are weird to me, the decorators and all of that. I'm generally I have Java PTSD, but I think LitElement is great. I think it's great. I think tag template literals and the things that they enabled us to do in JavaScript create really, really ergonomic interfaces. I think it's a great library.
So, to summarize my thoughts as well, and I have to say as well that I I've done several talks on web components. You can just Google Skulk web components on YouTube, and you can Google on YouTube. Oh, jeez, I need some sleep. And you'll find them. I spoke at DevConf as well 2 years ago about web components, and I think the big problem at this moment is web components. Dave Rupert had a really great article where he said that web components are being marketed to the wrong people, and I think he's straight on it. Like I think web components have a much better use case for people that are using something like WordPress and they want like a little like weather widget or something, or I think web components shouldn't be marketed to people building software and apps. It should be marketed to people, the same type of people that use something like Astro and want a little bit of interactivity. And I think that is it. Like the big problem is web components are marketed to the wrong and have been marketed to the wrong people. And I think the big problem is radical backwards compatibility. Like I'm broken record on this, but for me, that is it. Like the DOM is inherently imperative. There's no way unless you break radical backwards compatibility of getting around that. So so web components are bound by this imperative model. Like they can't get away from it unless you build custom abstractions on top of it. So I think for web components to be applicable to apps and software, we need to break radical backwards compatibility. And that's, I don't know what the future holds, but it's very unlikely that's actually going to happen. So I kind of see frameworks as that's just the reality of the world we're moving into.
Now a
right,
word from our sponsor, Opera GX.
Yes.
Regarding web components, right? So just very quickly, the imperativeness of web components. One of the problems with web components is that you can't do server-side rendering, really, if you're using custom elements in any case, or Shadow DOM. And they are working on that, right? Like there's active discussions about implementations and spec work stuff happening. I just checked this like a few minutes ago. It's still moving. Mozilla's positive. Chrome has had it since version 11. So they are moving on that, and a big part of the work at the moment is to kind of like make the DOM parser work for this stuff. And I think that's going to be interesting, hopefully, not just for web components, but one of the things that I've really been annoyed by is the fact that you can only imperatively change you can't do streaming of native DOM rendering.
Yeah.
Programmatically. The native DOM renderer can render in a streaming fashion if it's getting HTML in from a response. But if you're trying to dynamically update some part of the DOM, it's like all or nothing. It has to do it as a huge chunk.
Yes.
And have you ever been on GitHub where sometimes you click on a link and it just takes forever to go to the next page? And you literally like shift click that link and it loads instantly. And this is the difference sometimes between the different rendering models. Obviously there's like a race condition or something else happening there, but the browser can do it a lot more quickly in a streaming fashion, especially in terms of perceived performance. I'm hoping that out of this work for the Declarative Shadow DOM, there's going to be hopefully ways to do streaming DOM parsing, not just kind of under the hood and you can't access it directly.
And I think that so I'm just on the screen here. This is the article I shared from Dave Rupert. I like this. He says, make the ideal persona a WordPress user instead of framework authors. So like I think maybe it's important there to make a distinction between the document, which is the HTML, and the DOM as the actual API that you're using. And the DOM sucks. I think that's the problem. The document itself isn't that bad, but the way to interface with it through JavaScript is a dumpster fire. But anyway, I can talk about this the whole day. Let's talk about the web's next transition. Maybe like this is more of a segue than I was anticipating. But yeah, tell us about this, Xander.
Right. So this is not a new article. So forgive me for this not being a new thing. This was published in June. But it's a very interesting
JavaScript's
article.
timeless.
By since 1999 and by I think earlier 96 by Kent Dodds, and there's a lot of hype at the moment for things like HTMX, and I can already see, Ben, when you were talking about the validation example, I can already see people who are excited about HTMX going, oh well, we can do that, right? Like and it's true, you can do a lot of that with HTMX, but there are just inherent limitations because the ways of interacting with the client side state and sharing that across like different parts of the page are a little bit complicated. And then there's plugins you can add, but before you know it, like you have a whole complex ecosystem and it's not so simple anymore. In any case, this article goes into different rendering methods. Now, it is pretty pro remix, but that's not really what I want to focus on.
That's what I wanted to say as well. I also want to say, whenever I read anything by Kent, like I'm like, cool, what is the remix angle here?
Yeah,
like I need to, I can't engage in good faith until I'm able to identify where's the remix angle coming in here, and then I can actually read the article.
So he kind of first goes through a history of different rendering models that have been popular throughout the history of the web, starting with multi-page applications. So this was, Web 1. Everything was server rendered
MVC,
dynamically, and it was like there was at that point no JavaScript to speak of. Only really after Microsoft implemented XML HTTP request and applications like Gmail started popularizing this, did we get things like what he calls progressively enhanced multi-page applications. So this is what I think of as like Web 2.0, right? These were things that were in many cases still when you navigated from one thing to another thing, there was a whole full fresh page reload, but there was a lot of interactivity on these pages that was dynamic and that did not require you to do full server round trips. And then eventually we moved on from that to single page applications, which has been the predominant paradigm for a while now. And I think the popularity or the rise in interest for something like HTMX is partly in response to, it's like a reaction to the complexity we've had with single page applications. And however, I think in many ways, HTMX is kind of like a nicer interface over what we had previously with the progressively enhanced multi-page applications, right? It's kind of what it is. It gives you these very ergonomic primitives to like hook into different things and tell it how to operate. But it's not really breaking new ground there, in my opinion. And it's not really creating a more, I don't know if any of you remember this word, like an isomorphic experience. For a time, there was this idea of isomorphic JavaScript where you could write code that would run either on the server and or the client, anyway, so
the main thing I remember from
by design.
The main thing I remember from that is where like the community at large realized that isomorphic doesn't really make sense, and like kind of there was this transition to this term universal. And no one followed it. Everyone just kept on talking about isomorphic. It was like, no, that sucks. We're gonna continue talking about isomorphic, but
and that idea kind of fizzled out. I think I think there was some bit of a resurgence with the whole Jamstack and server-side rendering side of things, depending on the specifics of your stack. But it wasn't really ever so popular. And I think in many ways, again, so what I want to say is the interest in HTMX and similar technologies is kind of a reaction to single-page applications and the complexity and the difficulties people have had there. But in my opinion, people are running away from something rather than really running towards something for the right reasons. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there definitely are situations in which HTMX can be a great choice. One, if you have really low complexity needs. The trick is, of course, that like if your thing is successful, your complexity needs will increase. And then if you ever start butting up against the limits, what now, right? Like, what now? It's not exactly like you can just switch to a different technology easily. The other thing is, if you have a more legacy, Web 2.0 type thing that you need to modernize, and you can't throw away all of that existing technology, like maybe it's a Rails application, maybe it's some old code igniter thing, who knows, right? It doesn't even matter. Like, that's one of the things that's nice about HTMX. It's not coupled to your backend technology. But I think if you want to get away from the complexity of single page applications, you're just going to go back to the complexity of these multi-page applications. But you're going to have modern demands and expectations of interactivity placed upon you in many cases. And I think that can be difficult. And I also think, like, if it turns out that you need more, what then, right? Like, how are you going to scale beyond that at that point? And I think it's a risky choice. And don't get me wrong, like, I was interested in HTMX like a year ago, and I read all of their philosophical like writings, and I thought, like, this is definitely interesting. But this article from Kent C. Dodds goes into the next transition where it's a terrible name. Why, Kent? Really, you should have spent more time, in my opinion, on an acronym that's catchy, because the acronym for the next transition is PESPAs. Progressively enhanced single page applications. And
like a Vespa.
Remix is definitely an example of this, but kind of what's interesting about it, if you go into the details, is it really solves conceptually in a really elegant way a lot of the root causes for a lot of the complexity, which is basically client and server side state synchronization, right? By breaking through those boundaries in a way that isn't really a leaky abstraction, it makes life a lot simpler. So I would say, honestly, if you're interested in HTMX because you're really tired of like the complexity of React or whatever, give this article a read. And there's some good points, I think, and lessons to be learned from it.
Yeah. So I think my initial take on HTMX is I probably don't need a library for that. I can probably just create some of my own like helper functions and whatever utilities that does something similar.
But you can. The value is more in the mental model than the implementation.
Yes. No, sure. But so I think this is maybe an opportunity where I can step into the fire in solidarity with Ben. After everything that he said, I can maybe expose myself as well to draw away a bit of fire from him. I personally believe there is a valid use case for progressive enhancement. I think progressive enhancement is a good thing, and we should seek that. But if it's about inclusion, I can't help but feel a bit of a disconnect in terms of how much time we spend talking about progressive enhancement as something that is like, oh, it should run without JavaScript, compared to basic things around accessibility and browser support and so forth. And my take on that has been that I think progressive enhancement is a really cool problem to solve. And I think that's a much cooler and technically nice problem to solve than problems around accessibility and like catering to a wider range of browsers. Having to have something work without JavaScript, I think, is a bit of a cool factor, which, like you can demo it and it's like, ooh, cool. It doesn't work. Like, I don't know, like I'm scared if I'm saying this that people are like, progressive enhancement doesn't matter. Progressive enhancement matters a lot, but I do think
we're spending into the chat.
I do think to a large degree, a lot of the solutions for progressive enhancement is more scratching developers' own puzzles that they're going to solve instead of actually really being about inclusivity. Yeah, that is my take, my very cynical take. Yeah. Okay. And so, yeah, honestly, I think if this is something you care about, I think quick is a lot more interesting stuff. I think it makes more sense to me to just completely throw out hydration. If you want to do this type of thing, then hydration just becomes like a problem that you need to deal with. That is, and hydration is there because you want to still have an SPA at the end of the day after everything loads. So why not just then throw out hydration, just go full in, like in terms of what do they call it, resumability or whatever. But cool. Anything else worth any quick mentions before we end off?
So we kind of ran out of
TypeScript.
time for this, but there was the Mark Erickson's article on packaging Redux using ECMAScript modules. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to really dig into this, but you should read this.
Yes, very, very.
Which
good
one is it?
article.
Is it?
That's
the second one.
Yeah. That article is probably one of the best articles I have read in the last 8 years in the JavaScript space.
Yeah.
Like super well researched, super well put together, super consumable, lots of war stories, lots of practical advice. Really, really well written article, and really practical and really useful to anyone publishing a library.
I'm a massive Mark Erickson fan. My thing is just always, how do I make him interesting to my students? Because I wish more people read his stuff, but man, it can be a slog.
Definitely not part of the dev celebrity thing.
Yeah, he's definitely not your Primogen or your. But man, his stuff is so good. But yeah, or your Fireship. But oh man, it's specifically for beginners. It seems a bit insurmountable sometimes. But man, it's good.
I don't know. I think he did a lot of work in the Redux Toolkit docs and the Redux documentation as well. And I think in his blog it's been a while ago now, but he did a deep dive into React rendering and re-renders and the logic
not
that happens
particularly
there.
friendly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes and no. And I think this is actually one of the difficulties
No,
with
it's
React
largely no,
in
man.
particular.
Take a look at the article.
But with React in particular is that we keep saying, oh, this stuff is not beginner friendly. And I think as an ecosystem, as a community, I think we haven't stressed enough the kind of conceptual underpinnings of what underpins how React was designed and why it works that way.
Yeah,
and as a result, it's great that React in many cases is fast enough, and it does still, for the most part, just work the way people expect on the happy path. But when you're working on big long-lived projects, then you end up with all these difficulties. And honestly, most of them are, in my opinion, due to a misconception of how it really works under the hood. And for example, touching on what you mentioned earlier, React for Get. So React for Get is going to be a compiler that will automatically be able to memorize all the things. And that's interesting because the prevailing wisdom about React is don't memorize all the things, use memorization when you need to. React is fast enough. The problem is that when you do eventually figure out that you have a performance issue that would be solved by memorization, you end up having to memorize that thing and all the things that it is transitively reacting to, which can be a lot of things. And that can be quite difficult. So it's actually a lot easier to just memorize all the things by default. And then in the rare cases where the memorization is overall costing you more would if you didn't do equality checks and just re-rendered no matter what, which is rare for most applications. It tends to be something that is displaying live data that is updating a lot, very quickly. That's a lot easier because in those cases you just remove a few, memorizations and you're done. And it's not the prevailing wisdom in any case.
I think in my experience, and also why I think like memorization.
I think we need to start.
All right, cool. Let's wrap it up. So maybe in conclusion, So maybe in conclusion,
I was going to say on my points, I'd recommend Josh Kamal for his articles and rendering, really beginner friendly.
Is that how you pronounce his surname?
I think so. I sponsor him on GitHub. Canadian? I'm a huge fan of Mark Erickson, but his stuff is high level. I've got the articles here. I don't know if you want the links, his stuff is what I generally recommend to people learning. That's fantastic.
Maybe in closing, what I can also say is, so like you spoke about the fundamentals and kind of the underlying stuff under the hood, Xandor. There's a really great episode on JS Party where they kind of talk about the tension between, learning fundamentals and actually learning the tools themselves. And I think what's really neat about it is I think two of the panelists are actual coaches, so they kind of very much look at it through the lens of sports coaching and so forth as well. And I think an analogy that really stuck with me is they say, if you just let kids do what they want in like sports training, let's say basketball or whatever, they're just going to want to shoot hoops. They want to do the fun stuff. But you're going to have to force them to kind of do like drills and whatever. And for me specifically, as someone who's kind of like in a teaching position and so forth, it's kind of like that balance. In the one hand you want to make it fun and you want to have people be motivated, but on the other hand you want them to learn the fundamentals and understand that, because if you just leave them to their own devices, they're just going to want to shoot hoops and do the fun stuff without really getting the mental models and stuff down.
Do not fear the one who has practiced 10,000 kicks. We fear the one who has practiced one kick 10,000 times.
Yeah. There you go. I can write an amazing. I can create the best button ever in React, and I can't do much else.
You can do it right.
I gotta see this button, man.
I've created 10,000 buttons, but yeah, cool.
Talking about fundamentals, and this is not aimed at beginners, but for people who really want to understand at like a deep conceptual level, I've just shared a link there if you want to pull it up, called Build Your Own React.
Great article. I love that.
This was.
I have to run.
Brilliant.
I'm 7 minutes late for a meeting, guys.
Yeah, I think let's maybe end there. Okay. I'll put those in the comment in the description because I also need to head out. But it's a good sign. It was good seeing you guys. Like I had a lot of fun, and I'll catch you in a month.
Cheers, team.
Bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.